The dress was meant to be white, but the dust of Wyoming had turned it to something closer to the color of old parchment, and the tears streaking down her face left clean trails through the grime on her cheeks. Ryder Jamison had been checking the cattle fence when he heard the sobbing, a sound so broken and raw that it stopped him in his tracks somewhere between the ranch house and the northern pasture. And when he rounded the corner of the cattle pen on that scorching August afternoon in 1882, he found her there among the animals. A bride in full wedding attire collapsed against the wooden posts like she had run until her legs could carry her no further. She did not hear him approach at first, too lost in her own grief. But when his shadow fell across her face, she looked up with eyes so full of pain that something in his chest tightened in a way he had never experienced before. He knelt beside her without thinking, pulling the worn bandana from around his neck, and gently wiped the tears from her face with a tenderness that surprised even himself. The cattle moved around them with their usual disinterest, but the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them in that dusty pen, her ragged breathing slowly evening out as he cleaned the dirt and salt from her skin. She was beautiful even in her devastation, with dark auburn hair that had come loose from its careful arrangement and green eyes that held depths of sorrow no young woman should know. He guessed she could not be more than 20 years old, maybe 21 at most, and he himself had just turned 24 that spring. "What happened?" he asked quietly, his voice rough from days of speaking only to horses and cattle. She drew in a shuddering breath, her hands clutching at the ruined skirts of her wedding dress. "He did not come," she whispered, and those 4 words contained such devastation that Ryder felt anger kindle in his gut for a man he had never met. "Harold Ashford, my intended. I stood in that church for 2 hours while everyone watched and whispered, and he never came." Ryder helped her to her feet slowly, supporting her weight when her legs trembled beneath her. She was taller than he expected, the top of her head reaching his chin, and even through the layers of her wedding gown he could feel how she shook. "Let me get you inside," he said. "You can clean up, get some water, then you can tell me the rest if you want to." She nodded mutely, and he guided her out of the cattle pen and toward the ranch house, acutely aware of how her hand gripped his arm like he was the only solid thing in a world that had tilted sideways. The Jamison Ranch sat 5 miles outside Laramie, Wyoming, a sprawling property that his father had built from nothing and that Ryder now ran mostly alone since his father's death 3 years prior. He had 2 ranch hands who helped with the heavy work, but they had gone into town for supplies that morning, which meant the house was empty except for the 2 of them. He settled her in the kitchen, pumping fresh water into a basin and finding clean towels while she sat at the worn wooden table looking like a ghost in all that white fabric. When he set the basin before her, she looked up at him with something like gratitude, and he stepped back to give her space, moving to the stove to heat coffee even though the August heat made the kitchen feel like an oven. "I should not be here," she said after a long moment, her voice stronger now but still carrying that tremor of shock. "I should not have run. Everyone will be looking for me. My father will be beside himself. Do you want to go back?" Ryder asked, keeping his back to her as he worked, giving her the privacy to compose herself. The silence stretched so long he thought she might not answer, but finally she spoke. "No, I cannot face them. Not yet. Maybe not ever." He turned then, leaning against the counter and studying her properly for the first time. She had wiped most of the dirt from her face, revealing fair skin dusted with freckles across her nose and cheeks. Her wedding dress, despite its ruined state, was clearly expensive, the kind of garment that spoke of money and social standing. "What is your name?" he asked. "Hannah," she said. "Hannah Ashford, though I suppose I have no right to that last name now since the marriage never happened." What was your name before? Abbott. Hannah Abbott. She looked down at her hands, at the ring finger that bore no band. My father owns the mercantile in town. He wanted this marriage so badly. Said Harold was a good match, that he would take care of me, that I would want for nothing. Ryder poured 2 cups of coffee and brought them to the table, sitting across from her. But you did not want to marry him. It was not a question, and Hannah's eyes flew to his face, startled by his perception. How did you know? Because if you had wanted to marry him, you would be angry right now instead of relieved. Her hands wrapped around the coffee cup, and she stared into its dark depths. I should not be relieved. That is a terrible thing to feel, but you are right. I am relieved, and that makes me the worst kind of person because my father has been planning this wedding for 6 months. He spent money he could not afford on this dress, and the reception. And Harold's family is one of the most prominent in Laramie. And now it is all ruined, and I am sitting in a stranger's kitchen drinking coffee in a wedding dress that cost more than most people make in a year. You are not a terrible person for not wanting to marry someone, Ryder said firmly. Did you love him? I barely knew him. We had been courting for 4 months, and every conversation felt like a performance. He would tell me about his father's banking business and his plans to expand it, and I would nod and smile and say the things I was supposed to say, but I never felt anything real with him. Not once. She looked up at Ryder then, really looked at him, taking in his sun-darkened skin and the calluses on his hands and the way his dark blonde hair fell across his forehead. Who are you? Why are you being kind to me, Ryder Jamison? This is my ranch, and I am being kind because you needed help. He paused, then added, and because no one should cry alone in a cattle pen on what was supposed to be their wedding day. Something shifted in her expression, a small crack in the armor of her shock, and she almost smiled. That is a very specific thing to have an opinion about. I have opinions about a lot of specific things. This time she did smile, just a little, and even that small expression transformed her face. Thank you, Ryder Jamison, for your kindness and your coffee and for not asking me to leave. You can stay as long as you need, he heard himself saying, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. The ranch is big enough. You can rest, figure out what you want to do next. I cannot impose on you like that. You are not imposing. I am offering. He met her eyes steadily. Sometimes a person needs time to think before facing the world again. I understand that. They sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee as the afternoon light slanted through the kitchen windows. Outside, the cattle lowed in their pen, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out as it hunted. Ryder found himself studying her when she was not looking, noticing the proud set of her shoulders despite her distress, the way her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup in an absent gesture that suggested she was thinking far more than she was saying. Tell me about this place, Hannah said eventually. About your ranch. So he did. He told her about his father, who had come west after the Civil War with nothing but determination and a dream of building something lasting. He told her about the hard years of breaking ground and building fences, of winters that nearly killed them and summers that baked the land hard as stone. He told her about his mother, who had died when he was 12, and how his father had never been quite the same after that, throwing himself into the ranch work until his heart gave out one morning while he was mending a gate. He told her about learning to run the place alone, about the pride and the loneliness that came with being responsible for hundreds of acres and dozens of head of cattle. Hannah listened with an attention that felt rare and precious, asking questions that showed she understood the weight of what he was describing. When he finished, she said quietly, "You have built a good life here, a real one." "It is the only life I know," he admitted. "I have never been further east than Cheyenne, never seen an ocean or a big city, Some might say that makes me small. Some might say it makes you rooted, she countered. There is strength in knowing where you belong. The words hung between them, and Ryder realized that somehow in the space of an hour, he had told this stranger things he rarely shared with anyone. There was something about her that invited confidence, a quality of genuine interest that made him want to reveal himself in ways that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. A sound from outside broke the moment, the rattle of a wagon and the whinny of horses. Ryder stood, recognizing the cadence of his ranch hands returning from town. That will be Jack and Tom. They are good men, trustworthy. But if you would rather not see anyone yet, there is a spare room upstairs where you can rest. Hannah rose as well, smoothing down her ruined dress in a gesture that seemed more habit than hope of making herself presentable. I should probably hide until I figure out what to do next. If word gets back to town that I am here, there will be questions I am not ready to answer. He led her upstairs, acutely aware of her presence behind him, the rustle of her dress on the wooden steps. The spare room was simple but clean, with a bed his mother had made quilts for years ago, and a window that looked out over the western pastures. "It is not much," he said, suddenly seeing the plainness of it through her eyes, imagining the fine house she must have grown up in. "It is perfect," she said, and he could tell she meant it. "Thank you, Ryder, for everything." He nodded, suddenly awkward now that they were alone in the small space of the bedroom. "I will bring you some water for washing, and I think I have some of my mother's old clothes stored away. They will fit you better than that dress. I would be grateful." She paused, then added, "Will you tell your men about me?" "Only that you need a place to stay for a bit. They will not pry." He met her eyes. "You are safe here, Hannah. I give you my word on that." She believed him. He could see it in the way her shoulders finally relaxed, the tension draining from her frame now that she had found a temporary haven. He left her there and went to deal with Jack and Tom, who had unloaded the supplies and were grooming the horses when he found them. Jack was older, nearly 50, with silver threading through his dark hair and a weathered face that had seen hard times. Tom was younger, maybe 30, quiet and steady in his work. Both men had been with the ranch since Ryder's father's time, and he trusted them as much as he trusted anyone. "Need to talk to you both," Ryder said, keeping his voice low even though there was no one else around to hear. "I have a guest staying in the house for a while. A young woman who needs some time away from town. I would appreciate it if you kept that information to yourselves." Jack's eyebrows rose, but he nodded slowly. "She in some kind of trouble, nothing illegal, just personal matters she needs to sort through." Tom, who rarely spoke unless he had something important to say, asked, "She the bride who ran from the Ashford wedding?" Ryder's jaw tightened. "How do you know about that?" "Whole town was talking about it when we were loading supplies. Harold Ashford never showed up to his own wedding, and when folks went looking for him, they found him passed out drunk at the saloon with his arms around one of the girls who works there. Been carrying on with her for months, apparently. The bride ran off before anyone could explain, and her father has half of Laramie out searching for her." Anger surged through Ryder, so fierce and sudden that his hands clenched into fists. The picture was clear now. Harold Ashford had been too cowardly to break off his engagement, so he had simply not shown up, humiliating Hannah in the worst possible way while he drank away his guilt. "She does not know yet," Ryder said tightly, "about why he did not come. You going to tell her?" Jack asked, "When she is ready to hear it. Right now she just needs rest and safety." He looked at both men steadily. "No one knows she is here." "Understood." "Understood, boss," Jack said, and Tom nodded his agreement. Ryder returned to the house and gathered what he needed. A pitcher of warm water, soap, towels, and the trunk of his mother's clothes that had been stored in the attic. He carried it all upstairs and knocked softly on Hannah's door. When she opened it, she looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable now that she had taken down what remained of her wedding hairstyle, her auburn hair falling loose around her shoulders. "I brought what I promised," he said, setting the trunk and water inside the room. "Take your time. Dinner will be ready around sunset if you are hungry. Will you tell me something?" she asked as he turned to go. "Why did you help me, really? You found a strange woman crying in your cattle pen, and instead of sending her away or taking her back to town, you brought her into your home. Why?" Ryder considered the question, searching for the truth of it himself. "I suppose," he said slowly, "because you looked like I felt when my father died. Like the world had cracked open beneath your feet and you did not know how to find solid ground again. Someone helped me through that time, and I guess I wanted to pay that forward." Her eyes softened, and she reached out to touch his arm briefly, a gesture of connection that sent warmth spreading through him. "Whoever helped you was lucky to know you." He left before he could say something foolish, retreating to the safety of ranch work and familiar routines. But as he moved through the rest of the day, checking on the cattle and mending fences and doing all the tasks that usually occupied his mind completely, he found his thoughts returning again and again to the woman upstairs, wondering what she was thinking, whether she was all right, when he would see her again. When sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, he prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, with some of the salt pork Jack had picked up in town. He was setting the table when Hannah appeared in the doorway, and for a moment he could only stare. She wore one of his mother's old dresses, a simple blue cotton that was slightly too large on her frame but made her eyes look impossibly green. Her hair was still loose, drying in waves around her face, and she looked younger without all the elaborate styling, more real somehow. "I hope you do not mind," she said, gesturing to the dress. "Everything fit fairly well, though I had to take up the hem a bit." "You look well," he managed, the words feeling inadequate. "Are you hungry? Starving, actually?" "I have not eaten since breakfast, and that was just coffee because I was too nervous to keep anything else down." They ate together at the kitchen table, and though the meal was plain, Hannah praised it with genuine enthusiasm that made him feel absurdly pleased. They talked about small things at first: the weather, the cattle, the upcoming harvest season, but gradually the conversation deepened, ranging over topics he had never discussed with anyone before. She had gone to school back east for 2 years before her mother died, and her father had called her home to help run the household. She loved to read, particularly poetry and natural philosophy, and she had a quick wit that surprised laughter out of him more than once. "I should not be enjoying myself," Hannah said at one point, her smile fading. "My father must be frantic. I need to let him know I am safe." "We can send word tomorrow," Ryder offered. "One of my men can ride into town with a message. You do not have to go back before you are ready." She nodded gratefully, but he could see the worry in her eyes. "There is something else troubling you," he said. "Besides your father." Hannah was quiet for a long moment, pushing beans around her plate. "What happened today will follow me forever." In a town like Laramie, people do not forget when a woman is jilted at the altar. I will be the subject of gossip and pity for years. And the worst part is, I do not even care about Harold. I care about my reputation being ruined through no fault of my own. "It was not your fault," Ryder said firmly. "None of this was your fault. That will not matter to the gossips." She met his eyes across the table. "I have been thinking all afternoon about what to do next. I could leave Laramie entirely, go to Denver or even California, start over somewhere no one knows me. But that would mean abandoning my father, and he has no one else. Or I could go back and face the gossip, hold my head high and dare anyone to speak against me. But I do not know if I have that kind of courage. You have more courage than you think, Ryder said. You ran away from a wedding you did not want, crossed 5 miles of rough country in a wedding dress, and managed to hold yourself together through all of it. That takes strength. Or foolishness. Sometimes the line between the two is thinner than we think. He hesitated, then said, "There is something you should know about why Harold did not come to the wedding." He told her what Tom had learned in town, watching her face as the information sank in. He expected tears or anger, but instead she started to laugh, a sound that began as a giggle and grew into something wilder, edged with hysteria. "He was drunk at a saloon with another woman," she gasped between peals of laughter. "All this time I thought maybe something terrible had happened to him, that he had been hurt or was sick or had some kind of crisis, and he was just drunk at a saloon." The laughter turned to sobs, and then back to laughter again, and Ryder came around the table to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Breathe," he said quietly. "Just breathe, Hannah." She did, drawing in ragged breaths until she steadied, her hands gripping his like lifelines. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I do not know what came over me. You have nothing to apologize for. You have been through hell today." He stayed where he was, kneeling beside her, their faces level. "Harold Ashford is a fool and a coward, and you deserve so much better than him." "You do not even know me," she said, but her voice was soft, without accusation. "I know enough." And somehow, impossibly, it was true. In the space of one evening, he felt like he had learned more about Hannah Abbott than he had learned about some people he had known for years. There was a rightness to her presence in his home, a sense of recognition that went beyond logic or reason. They stayed like that for a moment longer, hands clasped, eyes locked, and Ryder felt the air between them charge with something electric and dangerous. Then Hannah pulled back gently and the moment broke. "I should rest," she said. "It has been a very long day." He nodded and stood, stepping back to give her space. "Sleep as late as you need tomorrow. There is no rush for any decisions." She paused at the doorway, looking back at him. "Ryder, thank you for everything. I know I keep saying that, but I mean it. You saved me today in more ways than one." After she went upstairs, Ryder sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the sounds of the house settling around him. He tried to tell himself that his interest in Hannah was purely protective, that any decent man would have done the same. But he knew he was lying. There was something about her that called to something in him, a connection that felt both fragile and undeniable. He also knew that thinking such thoughts was dangerous. She was vulnerable, confused, and recovering from a terrible betrayal. The last thing she needed was him developing feelings for her. But as he finally made his way to his own bed that night, he could not stop thinking about the way she had looked at him in the kitchen, the warmth of her hands in his, the sound of her laugh, even edged with pain. Sleep, when it came, was full of dreams he could not quite remember in the morning, but which left him feeling unsettled and strangely hopeful in equal measure. The next week passed in a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Hannah stayed at the ranch, sending a carefully worded message to her father through Tom that assured him she was safe but needed time to think. The reply that came back was frantic but understanding, her father begging her to take whatever time she needed, but to please come home when she was ready. The rest of Laramie, according to Jack's reports from his trips to town, was in an uproar over the scandal. Harold Ashford had left town entirely, reportedly going to stay with relatives in Cheyenne, while his parents tried desperately to contain the damage to their reputation. During the days, Ryder worked the ranch as he always had, but he found himself returning to the house more often than usual, drawn by Hannah's presence. She had insisted on helping around the house despite his protests, and he came back from checking the fences one afternoon to find her in the kitchen, flour dusting her nose as she kneaded bread dough with fierce concentration. "I am not very good at this yet," she admitted when she noticed him watching. "But your mother's recipe book was very detailed, and I am determined to learn. I cannot just sit around doing nothing while you work all day." "You do not owe me anything," he said, but he was pleased by her efforts nonetheless. "I know, but I want to help. Besides, it gives me something to focus on besides my own troubles." They fell into an easy domesticity that probably should have felt awkward but somehow did not. Hannah cooked meals with increasing skill, and Ryder found himself looking forward to dinner each night, not just for the food but for the conversation that accompanied it. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering shared views on some topics and engaging in friendly debates on others. She was sharper than any woman he had ever known, unafraid to challenge his opinions or assert her own, and he found that quality intoxicating. One evening, about 10 days after she had arrived, they were sitting on the porch watching the sun set when Hannah said quietly, "I need to go back soon. Not forever, but to see my father, to face what happened. I cannot hide here indefinitely as much as I might like to." Ryder felt something heavy settle in his chest at the thought of her leaving, but he nodded. "Whenever you are ready, I will take you, or one of the men can if you prefer." "I would like it to be you," she said, then quickly added, "if you can spare the time." "I can spare the time." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sky turn from blue to purple to deep indigo. Finally, Hannah said, "Can I tell you something? Something I have been thinking about but have not said out loud yet. Always. I am glad Harold did not show up to that wedding. If he had, I would have gone through with it because I thought it was what I was supposed to do, what everyone expected of me. I would have married him and spent the rest of my life being miserable, pretending to be someone I was not. His cowardice freed me in a way, even if it was humiliating." She turned to look at Ryder, her face barely visible in the gathering darkness. "And if he had shown up, I never would have met you." Ryder's breath caught. "Hannah, I know this is complicated," she said quickly. "I know the timing is terrible and my life is a mess, and you probably think I am confused or transferring my feelings or any number of rational explanations. But I need you to know that these past 10 days have been some of the best of my life. You make me feel seen in a way no one else ever has. You listen when I talk, you challenge me to think, you treat me like an equal instead of a decorative object. I have never felt this comfortable with anyone, and I think you feel it too." He did. God help him, he did. "I do," he admitted, the words coming out rough and low. "But you are right about the timing. You have been through something traumatic. You need time to heal, to figure out what you want without the influence of anyone else. And if I already know what I want, then it will still be what you want in a month or 2 months or 6 months. There is no rush, Hannah. I am not going anywhere." She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You are a better man than I deserve. You deserve everything good in this world," he said fiercely. "Never doubt that." They sat together in the darkness, hands clasped, and Ryder felt the future stretching out before them, full of possibility and promise. But he also knew he had to be patient, had to give her space to be sure of her own heart before they moved forward. No matter how much he wanted to pull her into his arms and tell her all the things he was feeling, he would wait. For her, he would wait as long as it took. The next morning they rode into Laramie together, Hannah wearing one of his mother's simpler dresses and her hair pulled back in a practical braid. She sat straight in the saddle, her chin high, preparing herself to face whatever awaited her. Ryder rode beside her, close enough to offer support but far enough to give her space to be strong on her own. The Abbott house was on the east side of town, a neat white structure with a garden in front that showed signs of neglect over the past week. Before they even reached the gate, the front door flew open and a man Ryder recognized as Samuel Abbott came running out, his face haggard with worry and relief. "Hannah!" he cried, and she was off her horse in an instant, running to meet him. They embraced in the middle of the garden, both of them crying, and Ryder stayed back, giving them their moment. Samuel Abbott was a slight man in his 50s, with thinning gray hair and the permanent stoop of someone who spent long hours bent over account books. He held his daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world, and when he finally looked up and met Ryder's eyes, there was nothing but gratitude in his gaze. "You must be the man who kept my daughter safe," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I do not know how to thank you enough." "No thanks necessary, sir. I only did what anyone would do." "I doubt that very much." Samuel kept one arm around Hannah, reluctant to let her go. "Please come inside, both of you." The interior of the Abbott house was comfortable but not ostentatious, filled with books, and the slightly dusty quality of a home maintained by a widower and his daughter. Samuel made tea with shaking hands while Hannah assured him repeatedly that she was fine, that she had been well cared for, that he should not have worried so much. "Not worry," Samuel said incredulously. "My daughter vanishes on what was supposed to be her wedding day, and I should not worry." "Hannah, I thought you might have done something desperate, I thought." He could not finish the sentence, but the fear in his eyes was clear. "I am sorry, Father. I should have sent word sooner. I just needed time to think, to be away from everything." Samuel turned to Ryder. "And you gave her that time without question or expectation of anything in return?" "Yes, sir." "Then you are a rare man indeed, Mr. Jamison." Samuel paused, then asked carefully, "May I speak with my daughter privately for a moment?" Ryder nodded and stepped outside, giving them space. He stood in the garden, studying the town around him. Laramie was bustling as always, people going about their business on this warm August morning. He wondered how many of them had talked about Hannah over the past week, how many had whispered theories about where she had gone and why. The thought made him angry on her behalf, though he knew gossip was an inevitable part of small-town life. After about 20 minutes, Hannah came out to join him, her eyes red but her expression calm. "He wants me to stay here for a while," she said, "to help him with the business and the house. He has been struggling without me, and I think he needs to know I am really all right. But I told him about you, about how kind you have been, and how I want to continue seeing you if you are willing." "What did he say to that?" "He said he trusts my judgment, and that any man who would protect his daughter the way you did is worth knowing." She smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "So I suppose you are going to have to court me properly now, Ryder Jamison." "Sunday dinners with my father, walks through town where everyone can see us, the whole proper courtship ritual." "I can manage that," he said, and felt his own smile forming. "Though I should warn you, I am not much for fancy words or grand gestures." "Good. I have had enough of grand gestures to last a lifetime. I want something real." They stood together in the garden, aware of the curtains twitching in nearby windows as neighbors tried to get a glimpse of Hannah Abbott and her mysterious protector. Let them look, Ryder thought. Let them see that she had come through this stronger, that she was not broken or ruined, that she deserved respect and not pity. He left her there with her father after promising to return on Sunday for dinner, and rode back to the ranch feeling lighter than he had in years. The future was uncertain, and there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving towards something instead of just maintaining what he already had. The courtship that followed was unlike anything either of them had expected. True to his word, Ryder came to town every Sunday for dinner with Hannah and her father, and Samuel Abbott proved to be a man of wit and intelligence who clearly adored his daughter. The three of them would spend hours around the dinner table, talking about politics and literature and philosophy, and Ryder found himself looking forward to those evenings with an intensity that surprised him. But it was the time alone with Hannah that he treasured most. They would walk through Laramie together, past the mercantile and the church and the rows of neat houses, and while some people did stare or whisper, many more greeted them warmly. Hannah had friends in town, good women who rallied around her, and made it clear through their support that they did not blame her for Harold's cowardice. Mrs. Chen, who ran the laundry, always had a smile and a wave for them. The school teacher, Miss Patricia Warren, invited Hannah to help with the students' reading lessons. Slowly but surely, Hannah was reclaiming her place in the community, redefining herself on her own terms. One afternoon in mid-September, Ryder took Hannah out to a spot on his ranch he had loved since he was a boy, a small grove of cottonwood trees near a creek that ran clear and cold even in the height of summer. They spread a blanket in the shade and ate the lunch she had packed, and then lay on their backs watching the leaves flutter overhead. "Tell me something you have never told anyone else," Hannah said, turning her head to look at him. Ryder thought about it. "When my mother died, I used to come out here and talk to her. I would tell her about my day, about what I was learning on the ranch, about my worries and hopes. It made me feel less alone. I kept doing it for years, even after my father died. Sometimes I still do it when I am working through something difficult." Hannah reached out and took his hand, threading their fingers together. "That is beautiful, not sad like you think it might sound, but beautiful. You carry them with you. What about you? Tell me something I do not know." She was quiet for a long moment. "When I was at school back east, I fell in love with a boy named William. He was studying to be a doctor, and he was brilliant and kind and everything I thought I wanted. We talked about getting married someday, about the life we would build together. Then my mother died and I had to come home, and he promised to wait for me to write every week." She paused, her hand tightening on his. "He stopped writing after 3 months. I heard later that he had married someone else, a girl whose father was a judge. It broke my heart in a way I thought I would never recover from. That is part of why I agreed to marry Harold even though I did not love him. I thought love was a fantasy, that practical matches were all that really existed. And now," Ryder asked quietly, "now I know I was wrong. Love is not a fantasy. It is just rare and precious and worth waiting for." He turned on his side to face her fully, propping himself up on one elbow. "Hannah Abbott, I have been trying to be patient and proper, to give you time to be sure of what you want. But I need you to know that I am falling in love with you. Have been since the day I found you in that cattle pen. And if you are not ready to hear that, I understand, but I cannot keep pretending my feelings are anything less than what they are." Her eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I have been waiting for you to say something like that for weeks now. I am in love with you too, Ryder. I think I have been since you knelt beside me and wiped my tears without asking anything in return." He kissed her then, soft and gentle, a first kiss that tasted of hope and new beginnings. She kissed him back with a sweetness that made his heart ache, her hand coming up to cup his cheek. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and the world seemed brighter somehow, more vivid in its colors and textures. "I do not want a long engagement," Hannah said after a moment. "I know that might sound rushed, especially after what happened with Harold, but I am sure about this, about us. I do not want to waste any more time." "Neither do I," Ryder agreed, "but I want to do this right. I want your father's blessing, and I want you to have the wedding you deserve, not some rushed affair that people will whisper about. I do not need anything fancy, just you and me and the people we care about." They planned it there under the cottonwood trees, imagining a simple ceremony in the small church in Laramie, with a reception at the ranch afterward. November, they decided, when the worst of the heat had passed, but before the deep winter set in. That gave them 2 months to prepare, 2 months for the town to fully accept their relationship, 2 months to build the foundation of their future together. When Ryder asked Samuel Abbott for permission to marry Hannah that evening, the older man's eyes filled with tears. "I had hoped you would ask," he said, gripping Ryder's hand firmly. "I can see how you look at my daughter and how she looks at you. That is what I wanted for her all along, what I thought I was giving her with Harold. I was wrong about him, but I am not wrong about you. You have my blessing and my gratitude." The next 2 months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Hannah moved between her father's house and the ranch, spending more and more time helping Ryder prepare for her permanent arrival. She brought feminine touches to the ranch house without erasing the memory of his mother, adding curtains and flowers and little homey details that made the place feel warmer. They worked side by side, talking and laughing and learning the rhythms of each other's days. The wedding took place on a bright November morning, with the sky so blue it hurt to look at, and the air crisp with the first hint of winter. Hannah wore a new dress, simple and elegant in cream-colored silk that her father had ordered special from Denver. It was nothing like the elaborate gown she had worn for her wedding to Harold, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Ryder wore his best suit, which was still fairly plain by city standards, but had been carefully cleaned and pressed for the occasion. The church was full, packed with people from town and the surrounding ranches. Jack and Tom sat in the front row, both of them grinning like fools, and Samuel Abbott gave his daughter away with tears streaming down his face. But for Ryder, there was only Hannah, walking toward him with a smile that outshone the sun, her hand steady in his as they spoke their vows. "I promise to stand by you through all of life's joys and sorrows," Ryder said, his voice carrying through the church. "To work beside you, to protect you, to cherish you for all the days I am given. You have made me believe in second chances and new beginnings, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the gift of your love." Hannah's vows were equally heartfelt, promising partnership and devotion, laughter and support through whatever came their way. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was chaste enough for public consumption, but carried the promise of deeper intimacy to come. The reception at the ranch was exactly what they had hoped for. A gathering of friends and neighbors celebrating their union with food and music and genuine joy. Samuel Abbott gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure, talking about his daughter's strength and his new son-in-law's integrity. As the sun set and lanterns were lit around the property, Ryder and Hannah stole away from the crowd for a moment, walking hand in hand toward the cattle pen where they had first met. "Hard to believe it has only been 3 months, Hannah said, leaning against his shoulder. "It feels like I have known you forever." "The best things do not need time to become real," Ryder replied. "They just are." They stood there together, listening to the sounds of celebration drifting from the house, and Ryder marveled at how completely his life had changed. 3 months ago, he had been a lonely rancher going through the motions of his days, wondering if this was all his life would ever be. Now he had a wife, a partner, someone who made every day brighter just by being in it. The first months of their marriage were an adjustment for both of them, learning to share space and make decisions together, navigating the small conflicts that arise when two people merge their lives. But they approached it all with patience and humor, determined to build something lasting. Hannah proved to be a natural at ranch life, quickly learning to ride and help with the animals. She was not afraid of hard work, and her presence brought a vitality to the ranch that had been missing. Samuel Abbott became a regular visitor, riding out most Sundays to have dinner with his daughter and son-in-law. The mercantile was thriving under the management of a young man Samuel had hired, which gave him more time to enjoy life and less time to worry about business. Watching him with Hannah, seeing their easy affection and mutual respect, Ryder understood where she had learned her strength and independence. Winter came hard that year, with storms that piled snow high around the ranch house and made caring for the cattle a daily battle. But there was a coziness to those dark months. Evenings spent by the fire with Hannah reading aloud from books they both loved. Mornings waking up warm despite the frost on the windows. They talked about their hopes for the future, about expanding the ranch and maybe one day having children to fill the bedrooms upstairs. It was during a particularly fierce January storm that Hannah first suspected she might be pregnant. She had been tired lately, and certain smells made her nauseous in a way they never had before. When she confided her suspicions to Ryder, he picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, his joy so pure and uncomplicated that it brought tears to her eyes. "We should not get too excited yet," she cautioned, even as she smiled. "It is early and things can go wrong." "They can," Ryder agreed, setting her down gently, "but they can also go right. Either way, we face it together." She confirmed the pregnancy with the doctor in town a week later, and suddenly, the future took on a new dimension. They spent the winter months preparing a nursery, arguing affectionately about names and painting the smallest bedroom a cheerful yellow that would work for either a boy or a girl. Samuel Abbott was over the moon at the prospect of becoming a grandfather, already planning all the things he would teach his grandchild. Hannah bloomed through the spring, her pregnancy showing in the gentle swell of her belly and the glow that seemed to emanate from her. Ryder found himself constantly amazed by her, by the life they were creating together both in her womb and in their daily existence. The ranch prospered that year, the cattle healthy and the land yielding well, and he could not help but feel that everything was finally coming together the way it was meant to. The baby arrived on a hot August evening, almost exactly 1 year after Ryder had found Hannah crying in the cattle pen. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Ryder felt more terrified than he had ever been in his life, listening to Hannah's cries and feeling utterly helpless. But she was strong, stronger than he had even realized, and when the baby finally came, her first question was whether the child was healthy. "She is perfect," the doctor assured them, placing the tiny girl in Hannah's arms. 10 fingers, 10 toes, good strong lungs. Congratulations." They named her Rosemary Ellen, after both of their mothers, and she was indeed perfect. Dark hair like Ryder's and green eyes like Hannah's, and a determination that showed itself even in infancy. Samuel Abbott cried when he first held his granddaughter, and Jack and Tom became unofficial uncles who were surprisingly gentle with the tiny person who had joined the ranch family. The first year of Rosemary's life was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure, filled with sleepless nights and small miracles. Ryder watched Hannah navigate motherhood with the same strength and grace she brought to everything else, and fell even more deeply in love with her if that was possible. She sang to their daughter in the evenings, the same songs his own mother had sung to him, and the circle of life and love felt complete in a way he had never imagined it could. When Rosemary was about 6 months old, Hannah said to him one evening, "Do you ever think about that day in the cattle pen, about how different our lives would be if you had not found me?" "All the time," Ryder admitted. He was holding their daughter, who had fallen asleep on his chest the way she often did. I think about how close I came to riding out to the north pasture that day instead of checking the east fence. How, if I had made a different choice, we might never have met. I used to believe things happened randomly, that there was no plan or purpose to any of it, Hannah said. But now I think maybe some things are meant to be. Maybe I was meant to run from that wedding, and you were meant to find me, and everything else was meant to unfold exactly as it did. Whether it was meant to be or just lucky coincidence, I am grateful every day, Ryder said. For you, for Rosemary, for this life we have built. They sat together in the gathering darkness, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, and Ryder felt a contentment so profound, it was almost frightening in its intensity. He had everything he had ever wanted, and things he had never even known to want. The ranch was thriving, Hannah was happy, their daughter was healthy, and the future stretched out before them full of promise. Over the years that followed, they added 2 more children to their family, a son they named Robert after Ryder's father, and another daughter they called me because Hannah had always loved that name. The ranch house, which had once felt too empty, now rang with the sounds of children's laughter and running feet. Samuel Abbott remained a constant presence until he passed peacefully in his sleep when Rosemary was 8, having lived long enough to see all 3 of his grandchildren, and to know his daughter was truly, deeply happy. Ryder expanded the ranch gradually over the years, buying adjoining land as it became available and building the operation into one of the most successful in Wyoming. But he never lost sight of what mattered most, never let the work consume him the way it had his father. He made time for his family, for long rides with Hannah where they could talk without interruption, for teaching his children everything he knew about the land and the animals and the life they had built there. Hannah became a pillar of the Laramie community, organizing school fundraisers and helping establish a lending library that served the whole county. She never lost her love of learning or her fierce independence, and she raised their children to value both hard work and education, practicality and dreams. The scandal of her failed wedding to Harold Ashford faded into distant memory, replaced by the much more interesting story of her happy marriage to the rancher who had found her crying in a cattle pen. They heard occasionally what had happened to Harold Ashford over the years, bits of gossip that filtered through from Cheyenne. He had married eventually, but the union was reportedly unhappy, and his father's business had declined under his management. Hannah felt no satisfaction in his misfortunes, only a distant gratitude that she had been spared that fate. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Ryder took Hannah back to the Cottonwood Grove where they had first confessed their love. The children were old enough to be left with Jack and Tom for an afternoon, and it was just the 2 of them, a blanket spread in the familiar shade, the creek still running clear and cold. 20 years, Hannah marveled, her head resting on Ryder's shoulder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. Any regrets? Ryder asked, though he thought he knew the answer. Not a single one. My only regret would have been if I had married Harold and never known what real love felt like. She turned to look at him, and even after 20 years and 3 children, she could still make his heart race with just a glance. You gave me everything I did not even know I wanted. A real partnership, a real home, a real life. I would go through that humiliation in the church 1,000 times if it meant ending up here with you. You never have to go through anything like that again, Ryder promised. From now on, every day is going to be better than the last. It was an impossible promise, of course, because life always brings challenges and sorrows along with its joys. But they faced everything together, weathering droughts and harsh winters, children's illnesses, and the normal struggles of any long marriage. Through it all, they held onto the foundation they had built in those early days, the deep respect and affection that had drawn them together in the first place. Their children grew and eventually left to build their own lives, though none of them went far. Rosemary married a young lawyer in Laramie and gave them 5 grandchildren. Robert took over more and more of the ranch operations as Ryder aged, proving himself to be as capable and dedicated as his father. Mee became a teacher, following in the footsteps of Miss Patricia Warren, and dedicated herself to educating the next generation of Wyoming children. As Ryder and Hannah grew older together, they found new joys in a quieter life. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over land that had been their whole world, holding hands the way they always had. Sometimes they talked, sharing memories or discussing their grandchildren's latest adventures. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, needing no words to express the depth of their connection. On a warm summer evening when Ryder was 72 and Hannah was 69, they walked out together to look at the cattle pen where they had first met. It had been rebuilt twice over the years, but it was still in roughly the same spot, and the memories attached to it had only grown sweeter with time. "You remember how terrified I was that day?" Hannah asked, leaning against the fence. "How convinced I was that my life was over." "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met," Ryder replied. "Running away from a bad situation, choosing yourself even when it was hard, that took courage." "I did not feel very courageous. I felt lost and ashamed and convinced I had ruined everything." She looked up at him, her eyes still that brilliant green even if her hair had gone silver. "And then you knelt down beside me and wiped my tears, and somehow I knew everything was going to be all right. I did not understand it then, but I felt it. Some part of me recognized you even before I knew your name." "I felt it too," Ryder admitted, "like I had been waiting my whole life to find you in that cattle pen." They stood together as the sky turned from blue to purple to deep indigo, the same progression of colors they had watched thousands of times from this very spot. Their children were settled and happy, their grandchildren were healthy and thriving, and the ranch would continue long after they were gone. They had built something lasting, not just in the physical legacy of land and cattle, but in the family they had created and the love they had shared. "No regrets?" Ryder asked, echoing the question he had posed so many years ago on their anniversary. "Not a single one," Hannah replied, and kissed him softly, sweetly, with all the tenderness of nearly half a century together. "Not a single one." They walked back to the house hand in hand, their steps slower now but their connection no less strong. Inside, the lights were warm and welcoming, and they could hear the sounds of their family gathering for dinner, the grandchildren's laughter mixing with their children's voices. This was what they had built from that moment in the cattle pen, from tears and kindness, and a connection that transcended logic or reason. That night, lying in bed with Hannah curled against his side the way she had for nearly 50 years, Ryder thought about the strange paths life takes, the unexpected turns that lead us to exactly where we are meant to be. If anyone had told him on that hot August day in 1882 that finding a crying bride in his cattle pen would change his entire life, he would not have believed them. But that is exactly what had happened. He had knelt and wiped her tears, and in doing so had found his future, his partner, his great love. Everything good in his life had flowed from that single moment of compassion, that choice to help a stranger in distress. It was the best decision he had ever made, and he would be grateful for it until his last breath. Hannah stirred slightly in her sleep, and Ryder tightened his arm around her, pressing a kiss to her silver hair. Tomorrow there would be more work to do, more grandchildren to spoil, more life to be lived. But tonight he was simply grateful, grateful for every day they had been given, every challenge they had faced together, every joy they had shared. The moonlight streamed through the window, casting shadows across the bedroom that had been theirs for so long. Outside, the cattle were quiet in their pens, the land was peaceful under the stars, and the future of the ranch was secure in the hands of the next generation. Ryder closed his eyes and let himself drift toward sleep, holding tight to the woman who had changed his world, the bride he had found crying in the cattle pen all those years ago. Their story had started with tears, but it had been filled with more laughter than sorrow, more joy than pain. They had built a life together from nothing but love and determination, and it had been more than either of them had ever dreamed possible. As Ryder finally slipped into sleep, his last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude for that August day, for the crying bride, for the courage to kneel down and offer comfort to a stranger. It had been the beginning of everything,